when I was younger and I ministered and preached out of a penal framework, I found myself skeptical of people's emotions, and especially if they were in therapy or they were seeing a counselor, because often, and that goes for myself, right? And I even had this experience being fruitful of I had to think about my parents and how did they harm me, or other factors in society, other people, like how did they hurt me, and how did I respond to that? It's not just that it was one way, but that was helpful, in a therapeutic context. And yet, when I thought about ministry and PSA, and I thought, like, well, when people come in the door and let's say I'm preaching or something, like, I feel like a pressure somewhere, that I need to tell people, don't think about yourself. Think about how God feels toward your sin. And then I need to help you feel guilt and fear, and then relief and gratitude, right? Like for Jesus, and in different proportions based on where I think people are. And so I
Mhm.
actually thought of therapy as, um, kind of, I tolerate that, but some people I think have been very skeptical, and I think of John MacArthur, for instance, saying, like, yeah, like there's just sin, right? And like, I'm so glad I am not in that camp anymore. I think of that as especially uh, important, because as pastors, we are trying to form communities that are helpful for people in their journey, and part of that journey, in their spiritual journey, and part of that involves, some reflection on how they were hurt by other people. Some are in more serious therapy, recovering from trauma and that kind of thing. And so, that's a little bit of what I mean. You have any initial impressions along those lines?
Yeah. Well, I think that's the bad competition, right? Or the
Right.
polarization between pastors and therapists, where because John MacArthur isn't just saying, oh, you don't need therapy, you need to confess your sin. What he means is you have individual personal sin and that you consciously willed, that you're accountable for, right? So it's not just sin, right? It's a very specific understanding of sin, where sin
Right.
comes from, that which is connected also to an understanding coming out of kind of our Western world, which is that conscious volitional thoughts are the most, if not the only real things about us. And so it's really, there's this kind of daisy chain of all these assumptions and very specific things that penal substitutionary atonement believes about the human situation that then clearly, uh, and so what happens, and this is what I'm trying to work against, but I still run into it all the time, is what happens is you have someone coming out of that environment for whom it's conscious volitional sin, your emotions are worthless, your bodies are unimportant, and there is no such thing as corporate or social sin. And then you kind of get burned out, upset, wounded, hurt, or traumatized by that. And you're like, there's another way. And a lot of people will say, and therapy is the other way, which just ends up reinforcing MacArthur's point, which is, oh, it's an alternate gospel, right? But it's just because he has such a lopsided gospel. So then it becomes something like, well, our emotions are good, our bodies are good, and we're supposed to be celebrated. I should never, ever feel shame about anything ever. Uh, and corporate sin is the worst thing, and I'm being oppressed by it. And then it becomes polarized that way. And then the people on that side would say, and I've seen people say things like, and you can't tell an abuse survivor to forgive their abuser, or things like that. And so then, like this understanding of abuse, and this is a long conversation, right? But and I'm never telling people to go back to their abusers, so I just want to get that out of the way, right? But there's this
Right.
kind of polemic that like forgiveness is now bad, or it's kind of optional in our spiritual formation because the therapist and the trauma informed therapist said so.
Right.
That just that's a polarization I'm trying to get over. Is like, can we, so I talk about sin all the time, but I always say something like the sins you've committed and the sins that have been committed against you. This is the world of sin, right? And the
Yes.
sins committed against you are not your fault, and you are not guilty for them. But let's be real that the sins that have been committed against you have probably left a mark, a wound, and have even shaped your nervous system such that you spontaneously now respond in ways that you don't want to, that you don't even recognize as yourself. Well, that's the sin, right? And Jesus or not, or Paul, in Romans 5 calls that the dominion or the kingdom of sin, right? We're all stuck in the kingdom of sin and it's death. Right. So I always want to kind of be a little more kind of nuanced, and our bodies fit into that. Our bodies are created good. Our emotions are created good. God created our emotional systems so we could connect and protect ourselves when needed in a flexible, appropriate way. But all of those things have been corrupted by sin in some fashion, right? So we have to talk about that too. So that's kind of like,
Yes.
I see the polarizations a lot. I want us to work together, but then it's like, it's just really complicated. I don't know if this fits, but the early church kind of dictum of like, Jesus became what we are so that we could become what God is.
Yes.
And I think a lot of times we think those are very abstract, like humanity and divinity, but like, shouldn't that be true about emotions? Is that Jesus took on our emotional life so that we could learn how to take on his. So if that were to be true, like, and I know a lot of people don't, some people speak this way all the time, and some people refuse to speak this way, right? But to say something like, do I hate the things Jesus hates? Am I grieved about the things Jesus is grieved about? And do I rejoice in the things Jesus rejoices in? And do I forgive the way Jesus forgives? Um, are we, I think, one group will
Yeah.
do the hate, one
Yeah.
group will do the love like Jesus, right? But it's like, we kind of need all of it.
All of it.
So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Lament the things he laments.
right.